Welcome to the latest episode of the More People podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hanwell, Managing Director for More People. I'm thrilled for this episode to be joined by Claire Donovan. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite.
Claire, would you be so kind just to intro yourself to our audience?
I've been in the food industry for about 11 billion years. I fell into it by accident after doing a degree in cows and sheep, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've been lucky enough to work for some fabulous businesses, and I've worked for myself doing a number of different things.
Fantastic. I want to delve into that as much as I can, but just going back to why the industry, why going into agriculture, produce, where did that kind of stem from?
I was born in what's commonly described as the largest council estate in Europe, in Ely and Cardiff. As my dad was born there as well, but I was really lucky. I had two very, very determined parents who bought a house in a little village in the Bay of Glamorgan. I was then exposed to agriculture, and I just loved it. I just fell into it and loved it. Got dragged along to Young Farmers when I was about 14.
Okay.
Did public speaking and stock judging and shearing and all manner of things, and then joined a shearing gang and just really fell into agriculture. And when it came to degree time, someone said, "Oh, why don't you come and do agriculture with me? I'm going down to Devon," and I went to Seal Hayne and loved it. But what I did sort of beforehand and in my year out was a little bit of scientific trial work, which really interested me. So sire trials in sheep and feeding trials in dairy. So when I came out of university, ideally I was looking for a policy job. I'd like to have got into agricultural policy, but I wasn't able to. I was being offered insurance jobs and nothing with any value really. But I got approached by a Kent produce business to run their lettuce trials, and from there I'd happened to be asked to do a project on bagged salads. So when the wonderful George Marston interviewed me for a job at Tesco and casually said, "What do you know about bagged salads?" and the way that you do when you're in your 20s, I told him exactly what I knew about bagged salads. And I got a job with Tesco doing prep veg and fruit. So from there, there's no escape.
But it's interesting, so that curious nature from way back to 14, just because of the people you were hanging around with, or because your parents weren't in?
No, parents, and I think we had to go back sort of 3 or 4 generations before we found any agriculture. But it's just fate, really, and it just was there, and I've loved it.
No, it's really intriguing to see, because your career, as we'll dive into in a minute, is fascinating. But I'm always intrigued to see how people get in there. Is it luck? Is it fell into? Was it part of the family, part of the DNA? But seeing what happens at 13, 14, the impact you've had on the industry, it's great, and we need to drive that education, as we speak about a lot. You've had the privilege, the challenges, the opportunities to arguably work on both sides of the fence, if I'm allowed to use that term, in the way in which you've supplied the retailers whilst working with the retailers. How would you sum up or describe the challenges? People
tend to find they're more comfortable on one side of the fence or the other, and I definitely feel more comfortable being on the supplier side. I've loved my chance to work with retailers, and I've worked with a few, and it's been brilliant. Almost the easiest way to describe it feels like a rugby analogy. So you think about a scrum, and when you're working on the customer side, it feels like you're in the front row, and you've got your business pushing you behind you, and you've got the supplier pushing you in front of you. So you're constantly being squeezed on both sides. Whereas when you're on the supply side, it feels more like being a number 8, just shoving one way. And it doesn't, your business is behind you almost, rather than pushing up against you. I love working with growers. I've got a real affinity, I suppose, for that farming piece.
Yeah.
I've always loved working with growers and always got on well with them. But having the experience of being in a retailer really helps me understand their pressures. That real brand reputation risk management, because we are unique within business, to it always being the retailer's fault. So it doesn't matter where the fault has been in the UK, and the retailers cop it on the front page. So that understanding of brand reputation and risk reputation, you painfully get it when you're in the retailer. But also the pressures that those individuals that you're dealing with are under, that you know that their business is pressuring them in a way that you perhaps don't get in a supply side. So, a couple of retail technical managers have said to me, "You get it, Claire. You understand the pressure I'm under," and that's.
I guess it makes you more sympathetic and empathetic, and as in a more of a humane way of looking at it.
Absolutely, you understand their time pressures. It's really easy to look at a time pressure someone's given you and gone, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" And chances are they haven't been told that, that is when they've got the information. They're under pressure. You just need to turn it round.
Yeah.
We talk about asking the next question, and I was privileged to work with some absolute legends in Tesco, and I always knew that I needed to know the information before they did. The last thing he wanted was one of them to come around the corner, Stan Burns to come around the corner with a bit of information he knew and you didn't. And that's also led me in the way I approach getting retailers information. It's so important. And the way I approach a lot of crisis management now.
Curious and
but to make sure that your stakeholders find out from you and not from the press or from your competitor, and that drives communication, and that's critical, and that's
drives partnership, I guess, doesn't it?
It drives partnership. They know they can trust you. Being able to getting the last time we had a big E. coli outbreak, and it was in the wholesale markets. It was 2017 or something, and getting that to Tesco, getting the information to Tesco before it hit the 10 o'clock news, so that my retail technical manager, when their boss came round the corner, said, "I know all about it. This is what's happening." That's so important.
Yes, be as proactive as you can to be reactive in the end. Yeah.
And as uncomfortable as some of the bad news can be, it's so much better coming from you.
I started out in my recruitment career recruiting technical professionals, and that's been the road that you've gone down. It's always been curious to me, or questionable, why there aren't as many technical individuals that make it onto the board, whether that be as a technical director actually having a place at the board, or whether that person climbing the ranks ends up to CEO or MD. I'm genuinely curious to get your take on that.
And you and I have talked about this quite a bit. I think it's a combination of things. I think we tend to be in our makeup quite risk averse and quite questioning, and I think that's critical for a technical role. You're always worried about what could go wrong. We tend to be glass half empty sort of individuals. That risk aversion can then be impactful on the way we communicate. So we have to learn for the first word coming out of our mouths not to be no. It might be, "Can I think about it?" But so that has an impact, I think, on the way we're seen in terms of leading businesses.
Okay.
I think boards tend to look for, particularly bigger boards where technical might not automatically be an executive position. Board tends to look for commercial acumen. They want,
but that's paramount in technical nowadays. Yeah?
Absolutely, and we could go on to talk about advocacy, which is the other thing that technical has that commercial perhaps doesn't. The way that you advocate into a customer, on far more levels, in far more places, in far more directions than you necessarily do commercially. So I've learned that because I've wanted to go further. And I think that's the bit that we maybe need to support our younger technical staff on. I know some of the people I coach and mentor really want to learn how to be leaders, and then there's nothing stopping them. But I think, and particularly as I've explored the INED world, people don't necessarily want technical because that's not necessarily a field that they feel they're weak in, but they do need audit and risk. And so as I've gone from being employed to having a sort of lovely portfolio lifestyle, the way I've found myself on boards is with that audit and risk. And again, it's a little bit about glass half empty, but businesses need to think about their risks and put stuff in place to stop them happening, because if you don't think about your risk, then it comes and knocks on your door. Yeah, very much so. And a potential risk could be having that lack of diversity on the board. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be on a number of boards, and one of the places where that diversity is coming in is the Welsh Rugby Union. And I tend to talk about diversity of thought.
Okay.
Because that's so important. It's not necessarily about whether I'm male or female, or whether I've got 75 caps or 5 caps or no caps. It's about diversity of thought. And we bring a different view, we bring a different lived experience, we bring a different set of reasoning. And if you're not careful on your board and everybody looks the same and agrees, then you don't get that challenge. And, you disagree in private, agree in public. But you need the challenge around a board to really push the board. Otherwise, you just end up saying yes, and you don't see troubles coming up behind you.
You don't cover your blind spots, do you? I'm really intrigued to talk about your more recent role with MSIN. We've been privileged to have Paul Wilgoss, Shane Tyler on this podcast, and I've learned so much from them, learning about what we can do moving forward. Please just talk us through the current role.
So thank you for a start for being so supportive of MSIN. MSIN's a modern slavery intelligence network formed in the wake of Operation Fort, which is still to date the largest prosecution of modern slavery victims in the UK. And if you haven't seen The Hunt for Britain's Slave Gangs, I'd recommend anyone watches that. It's a fabulous film done by Longtail Films in Bristol. And just the opening credits, seeing one of the victims talking about the impact it's had on his life, it gets to me still. Yeah. One of the things I fell into at Tesco was ethical trading, and it was a case of somebody couldn't go to a meeting when I go along. It turned into a working group around modern slavery in the UK. Now, this is late 90s, early 2000s, and it became Jim Sheridan's private members bill to the Gangmaster Licensing Act. Now, again, it's an ill wind that blows no good at all. The Morecambe Cocklepickers disaster happened in the February that the private members bill was being read, and it bumped it up, and it meant that it went into legislation, and that without that it wouldn't have been heard. The sort of stats we're talking about across the whole of the Atlantic slave trade, there was about 12 to 15 million people enslaved. We've now got around 49 million people at this point in modern slavery. And it is horrific. They're human beings that are having their lives blighted by organised crime gangs. Yeah. And if you look at it from Shane will always talk about follow the money. It's cheaper and safer to traffic people than it is to traffic heroin. You'll get a longer prison sentence for trafficking a kilo of heroin than you will for trafficking a minibus full of people. So organised crime has moved into it because it's lucrative, profitable, it's safe. You can use a human being in lots of different ways. They're not just working in your pack house there. You've propped them up prop them up in a doorway in Peterborough in the evening as well. You look at the McDonald's case, those people working 30-hour shifts, without a break, and all that money was going to the slave operators. I would now say, if you're not finding evidence of labour rights abuse or modern slavery, then you are not looking hard enough. It is there. Shane's absence of normal.
Yes,
those bits about reframing your thinking. Don't think about an individual as stealing food. Think about him being so hungry because he's not being fed by his slavers. If you think about unusual activity within a canteen, people charging their personal electronic devices in a canteen, if their home life is so precarious that they can't charge their belongings at home, that should be raising questions for you. What MSIN does is safely share details. So maybe that little bit of a jigsaw puzzle that helps everybody with an investigation.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating, and we can't thank you enough for the work that you do, you continue to do with Shane and Paul and what have you. It's absolutely amazing, and thank you again for being a guest on this episode. Thank you, Claire.
Cheers.
Super.